Hi guys. Tonight, we settle into the hush of a world turning white. You can almost see your breath plume out in the darkness as you imagine standing on a prairie edge or at the lip of a forest, your boots crunching over the very first crust of snow. It's that thin, silvery powder, almost innocent at first glance. But you and I both know what's coming next. Months of cold, long hours of darkness, and a test of body and spirit that most modern folks, let's be honest, probably wouldn't survive beyond a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're here, let me know your location and your local time down in the comments. I love seeing how this little campfire stretches across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Let the warmth of the blankets hug you, and follow me into the drifting snow. The air smells sharp, cleaner than at any other season, and it almost stings your nostrils as you inhale. The first snow is not just a meteorological event, it is a signal. For native communities across North America, it whispered of change. The fields were no longer to be plowed, the rivers soon to be sealed. If you stood in a Dakota camp, you'd notice how quickly people shifted rhythms, packing away the remnants of summer hunts and pulling out the carefully stored furs. The cold was not a surprise. It was expected, and preparation was the difference between life and death. You hear the muffled thud of snow dropping from pine branches, and the silence afterward feels heavier than any summer night's hum of crickets. Winter was a season of withdrawal into tight spaces, but also a season of gathering memory. And right here at its beginning, as the first flakes lace the landscape, you sense the mix of dread and reverence. A mainstream fact: many plains and woodland tribes actually tracked their calendars by moons and seasonal markers, not by numbers on a page. The Lakota, for instance, spoke of the moon of the popping trees, a name given when frost grew so sharp it cracked bark with rifle, like snaps. Imagine lying awake to that sound, nature itself echoing gunfire outside your shelter. It wasn't just poetic, it was practical, a reminder that the heart of winter had truly arrived. But then comes a quirkier tidbit, something you might not expect. Some communities believed snow had a taste. Children would scoop it up, melt it on their tongues, and insist each fresh fall carried a different flavor. Elders, perhaps with a sly smile, encouraged this belief, saying the snow carried stories from the sky. It's hard not to chuckle imagining a group of kids arguing over whether last night's flurry was sweeter than the week before. Still, historians debate the mood that greeted these first storms. Did families meet the snow with sighs of resignation, weary of long confinement, or did they welcome it as a relief from relentless travel and labor, finally a reason to rest? Some evidence leans both ways, depending on which region you peer into. You picture a council fire glowing through the night, voices murmuring about how much dried meat remained, and just beyond that circle of light, the faint hiss of snow continuing to fall. You shuffle forward, boots sinking deeper now, and each step is a reminder of the work to come. Snow itself was both enemy and friend. On one hand, it blocked trails, buried tools, and froze rivers solid. On the other hand, it insulated caches of food, offered tracks of game to follow, and created clean water when melted. You scoop a handful, let it burn cold against your palm, then drop it, watching how it dissolves into nothing. The first snow also forced you to notice the sky. Clear nights, with their pale moonlight bouncing across icy plains, were stunningly bright. You might even mistake them for dawn if you woke suddenly. That brightness, though, made it harder to sleep deeply, especially when light spilled through smoke holes in lodges. You lie back in your imagined hide bed, the scent of wood smoke clinging to your hair, and realize just how long the hours could stretch. The animals noticed too. Herds shifted, birds vanished, coyotes grew bold, their howls carrying farther in the frozen air. One coyote's yip might wake half a camp, and perhaps you'd chuckle at how even a creature so small could sound like a pack of ghosts. These signs were watched carefully when the animals acted strangely. people knew harsher cold was creeping closer. And let's not forget your own body. Without layers, your skin prickles in minutes. With the wrong shoes, your toes begin to ache alarmingly fast. That creeping ache, you discover, isn't just discomfort, it's warning. Native families taught their children to notice these signals, to never ignore numbness. You try flexing your fingers just to reassure yourself they still bend. Survival was 1,000 tiny choices like that. Picture yourself ducking back into a lodge. Inside, the world shifts instantly. The snow's hush gives way to crackling firewood and the earthy smell of packed earth walls. Children huddle close to mothers, while older men and women trade knowing glances. Another winter has begun. The air is thick, almost humid, with steam rising from wet mittens hung to dry. You shrug out of your outer hide and suddenly feel the fire's warmth hit your chest like a blessing. In that moment, you're reminded of why the first snow is so important. It's not merely weather, it's a bell tolling the start of the season of patience, resourcefulness, and endurance. You may even feel a strange calm, knowing the outside world will quiet under its blanket, and all that remains is what you've prepared, what you've learned, and who you sit beside. And outside the lodge, the snow continues falling, silently covering trails, trapping last autumn's leaves, making every familiar landmark strange again. Tomorrow will look different, and the day after even more so. By the time winter reaches its depth, the ground beneath will be a memory. And you? You're about to step deeper into this story, following the footsteps of people who turned survival into art, who faced each frozen night with resilience we can still marvel at today. You rise the next morning to a silence, so complete it almost hums in your ears. The snow has stopped falling, but its weight presses down on the branches, bending them into arches above narrow paths. You breathe in air so crisp it feels like tiny crystals cutting your lungs, and you notice how quickly your eyelashes freeze together if you dare to blink too slowly. The long winter is here to stay, and now every choice revolves around one urgent question: where will you spend the worst of it? Seasonal migrations were not just about chasing warmth, though warmth certainly mattered. They were about food, shelter, and spiritual balance. Native communities across North America developed rhythms that mirrored the pulse of their land. The Apache, for example, would move from the higher, colder mountains into valleys where forage for animals remained more plentiful. On the plains, bands of Lakota might follow bison herds southward until snow piled too high for either human or beast to move easily. The timing had to be exact. You leave too soon, and you waste strength carrying loads when resources are still nearby. Leave too late, and you risk being caught in blizzards that make even a mile of travel feel like eternity. You imagine standing at the edge of camp as families pack belongings. Rawhide bundles creak under their ties, dogs yip nervously, sensing the journey ahead. For the fortunate, sleds or travois drag along behind, carrying hides, tools, and dried food. For others, everything is lashed to backs, shoulders bowing under the weight. The soundscape is a mix of children laughing at first, then whining as the cold gnaws deeper, and adults murmuring encouragement or snapping impatiently to keep the line moving. A mainstream historical fact: the Iroquois Confederacy, in the dense woodlands of the Northeast, did not always migrate far, but rather shifted between longhouses located in forested clearings. Their semi-permanent homes allowed them to weather winters without constant relocation. But even then, hunting parties might travel outward for days, tracing deer trails through snow. Each strategy depended on environment: desert, mountain, forest, or plain. All demanded slightly different answers to the same eternal challenge. But here's a quirky tidbit that makes you smile. Some tribes watched the behavior of muskrats to predict winter's severity. If muskrats built their lodges with unusually thick walls, people said it meant brutal cold was ahead. Picture yourself crouching by a frozen pond, examining a dome of mud and reeds, nodding gravely as if the animal's architectural choices were weather forecasts. And honestly, who could argue? You might have trusted the muskrat more than the sky. Historians still dispute how uniform these migration patterns really were. Did entire bands always travel together, or did some families split off to seek their own fortune? Archaeological evidence shows campsites scattered across unexpected regions, suggesting more flexibility than rigid seasonal maps imply. Perhaps it was a blend of communal movement and individual improvisation, just as you, listening now, would weigh whether to stay with the group or gamble on a shortcut through the woods. The act of migration itself was a sensory ordeal. You feel the burn in your thighs trudging through knee-deep snow, hear the crunch of frozen crust breaking under each step, and smell the sharp tang of sweat mixing with icy air. Sometimes sleet lashed faces so hard it felt like gravel hurled from the sky. Other times, under pale winter suns, the snow dazzled bright enough to cause temporary blindness, unless you squinted or wore slitted eye coverings carved from bone or wood. And yet, there were small moments of joy. Children slid down snowy hills on bark sleds during rest stops. Women shared jokes as they secured bundles. Men tested their voices against the emptiness, singing to keep morale high. You can almost hear those notes, low and steady, carrying across a frozen valley where sound echoes strangely, making one voice seem like many. Travel also bound people together. Nights along migration routes turned into micro-villages. Fires dotted snowy clearings, smoke curling upward to mingle with stars. You roll into a blanket, the ground still cold despite the hides beneath, and you listen to conversations about where to find the next herd, which river crossing will be safest, or whether the weather spirits can be coaxed into mercy. These camps might last a single night or a handful, depending on snowstorms and sore feet. There were risks, of course. A swollen river with thin ice could swallow sleds whole. A blizzard might scatter travelers in all directions, forcing frantic shouts into white voids. And if food stores ran low during the journey, hunger gnawed harder than the cold itself. You tighten your stomach, imagining chewing dried sinew just to keep your jaw moving, just to trick yourself into feeling fed. Yet migration was more than survival. It was identity. Where you moved, when you moved, and how you moved, all tied to stories passed down through generations. The Cree might recount ancestral migrations as myth and memory, blending geography with legend. To walk those same trails was to reenact creation itself. You can sense the pride in following a path your great-grandparents once trod, even if your toes ache and your shoulders groan. By the time you reach the chosen wintering ground, perhaps a sheltered valley, a bend in a river, or a thick forest grove, you feel relief like a physical weight lifted. Fires spring up, shelters rise, and laughter becomes easier again. The migration is over for now. But as you glance back at the path of trampled snow behind you, you know the season has only just begun. The hardest nights are still waiting, and your preparations must hold strong against the relentless cold. You rub the stiffness from your legs after days of trudging, grateful to finally stand still in a place chosen carefully for shelter. The valley curves around you, or maybe it's the edge of a dense pine forest, and the wind feels different here, softer, muffled by trees or hills. This is where your people will dig in for the long winter. And when I say dig in, I mean literally. Native communities across North America built winter homes that were marvels of adaptation, constructed not with blueprints on paper, but with knowledge passed mouth to ear, hand to hand. You can picture yourself kneeling in the snow, watching as poles are driven into the ground, earth piled against sides, and smoke holes carefully shaped above. What looks like a mound of dirt to an outsider is, in truth, an earth lodge warm enough to hold whole families. A mainstream historical fact: the Hidatsa and Mandan tribes along the upper Missouri River constructed earth lodges so strong that some could last more than a decade before needing rebuilding. The thick walls, sometimes several feet of packed earth over a wooden frame, acted like insulation, keeping bitter winds outside and precious warmth inside. Step through the low entryway, and you'd enter a cavern-like space glowing with firelight, filled with the hum of voices and the scent of dried corn. But here's a quirky detail that makes you smirk. Some earth lodges had decorated roofs, Families might place carved figures or even animal skulls on top, not only for protection but for a little style flair. Imagine trudging through a blizzard, head down, then glancing up to see a bison skull grinning through the snow, like the world's earliest form of winter yard decor. Functional, yes, but also a statement piece. Scholars still puzzle over exactly how communities decided who built which kind of winter shelter. Wigwams, teepees, earth lodges, pit houses, different environments demanded different answers, but archaeological sites sometimes show multiple styles side by side. Was it about tribal tradition, or just pragmatic borrowing from neighbors? The debate lingers like smoke caught in rafters. For you, though, the effect is immediate. Inside, the air shifts from biting cold to a heavy, smoky warmth. You step carefully, bare feet cushioned by mats of woven reeds or hides, and you hear the crackle of firewood as it eats away at logs cut weeks before. The ceiling is low, so you stoop a little, and the shadows dance across curved walls. A dog curls by the door, lifting its head as you enter, then sighing back into sleep. The structure itself teaches you about priorities. Thick walls keep heat in. Entrances face away from prevailing winds. Smoke holes double as vents and skylights, though on the coldest nights they might be covered, leaving the air heavy with haze. Beds are arranged along the edges, layered in hides, so that the center space can remain open for fire and gathering. You find yourself instinctively drawn to that central glow, as if human DNA remembers what warmth means more than anything else. And the sounds those tell you as much as the sights. The wind howls faintly outside, but in here you hear only the snapping of twigs in flames, the scrape of bone awls sewing hides, and the occasional cough as smoke tickles a throat. Children whisper under blankets. Someone sharpens a blade. The entire lodge feels alive, a heart pumping against the cold. You think of how clever insulation is. Snow itself, piled over the structure, makes it warmer rather than colder, trapping heat like an added blanket. That realization surprises modern sensibilities after all. Snow is freezing. But here, you see it differently. Snow is not an enemy. It is a tool. You press your hand against the packed walls and marvel at how little heat escapes. Even the placement of lodges matters. Sometimes clusters of homes formed small winter villages, each entrance angled just so, forming a protective circle against both weather and enemies. You can almost picture the glow at night, dozens of smoke columns by day, dozens of fires glowing faintly by night, like stars fallen to the earth. There's humor here too. Families crammed into close quarters often teased one another about snoring, or the endless complaints of elders who claimed the fire was always too hot or too cold. You grin imagining someone stomping out to fetch more firewood, muttering under their breath, only to trip in the snow and return covered in powder while everyone chuckles. Survival was serious, but laughter was essential insulation too. As you lie back against furs, listening to the low drone of stories told for the 100th time, you realize the genius of these lodges was not just structural. They created a psychological cocoon. The outside world might be endless white silence, but in here was color, sound, warmth, and community. And with that, the first true night of wintering begins. You wake to the sound of soft scraping, the rasp of a hide stretched taut over a wooden frame. The fire has burned low, glowing red in its bed of ash, but the lodge is still warm. Around you, people are already at work, because in the frozen world outside, clothing isn't fashion, it's survival. Native communities had long perfected the art of turning animal skins into protection against the cold. Buffalo hides, elk, deer, rabbit, even muskrat all stitched, layered, and tailored with a precision that made the difference between life and frostbite. You run your hands across a buffalo robe, thick and heavy, its smell faintly musky, its warmth immediate. Wrap it around your shoulders, and the world outside becomes a little less cruel. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Among the Plains tribes, buffalo hides were often worn with the fur side facing inward during the most brutal cold. trapping heat directly against the body. Some hides were so large they could double as bedding at night. They weren't just garments, they were portable shelters. Step outside wrapped in one, and you carried the warmth of an entire animal with you. But you can't help smiling at a quirky tidbit. Rabbit fur was sometimes considered the poor person's winter coat. Why? Because while buffalo was majestic and elk durable, rabbit fur had to be pieced together in dozens, even hundreds, of tiny squares sewn edge to edge. The result looked a little patchwork, maybe even comical. Imagine striding proudly into council only for everyone to notice. Your robe was made of 100 rabbits. Useful, yes, but not exactly prestigious. Still, it kept you alive, and alive is always in style. Scholars continue to debate how standardized these clothing practices really were. Did every band follow the same methods of tanning hides, or did techniques vary widely? Some archaeologists argue for shared traditions across regions, while others point to unique stitching styles and decoration as signs of distinct cultural fingerprints. The truth is hazy, stitched together like the furs themselves, full of variety and subtle difference. You slip into moccasins lined with fur, marveling at how they mold to your feet. Unlike stiff European boots, these are flexible, quiet, and warm, letting you move silently across snow. In deep drifts, snowshoe moccasins with longer, upturned toes keep you from sinking. You wiggle your toes, grateful for the clever design. The process of making these garments is labor itself. Women scrape hides free of fat and tissue, rub them with animal brains to soften, and smoke them over fires to weatherproof. The smell of that process lingers in your nose, earthy and sharp, as though the garments carry memory of the hunt itself. Each stitch is bone needle through hide, fingers calloused from endless repetition. You realize it is not just work, it is devotion to the safety of family. Children, bundled in miniature versions, waddle stiffly but stay warm. Elders, draped in layered robes, lean close to fires, nodding in satisfaction at the workmanship of younger hands. Decorations fringe, beadwork, dyed porcupine quills, sometimes adorn winter clothes, but only when function is guaranteed. You picture a young girl twirling to show off her mother's careful beadwork, only to be hushed back toward the fire lest frostbite undo all that artistry. Even the head and hands are covered. Fur hoods drawn tight muffle the world, and mittens made from beaver or buffalo turn hands into padded clubs. If you've ever tried to use delicate tools in thick mittens, you understand the trade-off. Warmth wins over dexterity every time. Yet clever designs allowed some mittens to be flipped open at the fingertips, just long enough to tie a knot or strike a spark, before tucking safely away again. Step outside the lodge now. The wind slices across your face, and without your hood you feel its sting instantly. Pull it up, and the sound changes. The world muffles, your own breath loud against fur, your vision narrowed to the slit between hood and cheek. It's like wearing a private cave you can walk in. There is humor in winterwear, too. People sometimes teased one another for oversized robes that trailed in the snow or for hats that made them resemble animals. Children delighted in swapping garments or sneaking rabbit furs onto dogs, sending them trotting around camp dressed for a joke. Even in survival, laughter stitched its way into the seams. And at night, when everyone lay down, those same robes became bedding. You wrap one around yourself, cocooned against the draft creeping in through the door. The warmth builds quickly, and the fire's glow flickers on fur edges, reminding you that life continues because someone long ago mastered hide, needle, and thread. As the wind moans outside, you whisper gratitude into the folds of buffalo, elk, rabbit, whatever hides you. Without them, the story would end here. With them, you turn on your side, close your eyes, and breathe steady, ready to face another frozen day. You stir awake in the middle of the night, not because of the cold this time, but because of the faint hiss and crackle coming from the lodge's center. The fire has burned low, glowing like embers in a great animal's belly, and you realize someone is already tending it. Firekeeping isn't a casual job out here, it's sacred duty, And if the flames die, everything else begins to unravel. Imagine yourself crouching by that fire, a stick in hand, coaxing sparks from coals buried under ash. You blow gently, watching orange veins flare to life, feeling heat bloom against your cheeks while your back stays cold as stone. The smoke curls upward, threading its way through the vent above, leaving the air heavy but breathable. Without this ritual tending, feeding, nursing, the lodge would fall silent in more than one way. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Many native communities, from the Anishinaabe in the Great Lakes to the Pueblo in the southwest, kept sacred fires that were never allowed to extinguish during winter. The flames represented not only warmth but continuity, a visible reminder that life persisted in the teeth of snowstorms. Families often rotated the responsibility, making sure someone was always awake to guard the coals. But there's also a quirky tidbit. Some groups believed that if you let the firewood crack too loudly, it meant someone was gossiping about you in another lodge. Imagine sitting by the hearth, a log popping suddenly, and everyone side-eyeing each other like, "All right, who's talking smack right now?" It added a layer of humor to what was otherwise serious business. Historians still wrestle with the question of how much of firekeeping was practical versus ceremonial. Was every fire a spiritual link, or was some just the pragmatic outcome of needing hot food and warm bodies? Evidence suggests both, but it's hard to separate where survival ends and spirituality begins. Maybe it didn't need separation at all. For the people who lived this way, warmth itself was a blessing. You add another log, listen to the crackle, and feel relief course through your body. The warmth seeps into bones stiff from cold nights, softening joints, easing breath. Fire wasn't just heat, it was light in a world that could otherwise drown in endless dark. Step outside without it, and the stars are sharp, merciless, the snow black and blue in their glow. Step back in, and the flicker paints walls in gold, reminding you that safety is possible. Children would fall asleep watching sparks float upward, as if the fire was telling its own stories. Elders, seated nearest to the flames, might murmur advice or caution tales while poking the coals. The fire also dictated daily rhythms: waking, cooking, repairing tools, even laughter, all centered around that steady core of heat. It was both clock and compass. You picture the smell, too. Smoke weaving into hides, hair, even your skin. After a while, you no longer notice it, though strangers might sniff and recognize instantly where you belong. That scent was identity, a signature of survival. And there were practical tricks. To keep a fire alive through the night, coals could be buried under ash, banked carefully, so they smoldered until morning. Children might be sent to neighboring lodges with glowing sticks if the flames here accidentally died. You imagine the sight of a child rushing through snow, torch held high, sparks trailing behind like fireflies in the dark. Sometimes fire also drew danger. Predators lingered at the edge of light, their eyes glinting faintly, uncertain whether to approach. Raiders, too, could spot smoke plumes by day. Yet families weighed those risks against freezing, and warmth always won. You curl closer, pulling your robe around you, and think about the fire as companion. It speaks in snaps and hisses, sighs when logs shift, roars when fed. You lean in and whisper back, as though in conversation. Because really, without it, the night feels endless, merciless. With it, the night becomes bearable, even beautiful. So you lie back once more, the fire's glow flickering on the lodge's roof, and you realize this truth. In winter, the flame isn't decoration or convenience. It is life itself, guarded like kin, nurtured like a heartbeat, and feared if ever extinguished. As your eyes close, you promise silently, as countless others did before you, keep the fire alive. By morning, your stomach rumbles, a low protest that even the warmth of the fire cannot silence. The smoke has seasoned your tongue, but hunger gnaws sharper. Outside, the snow glitters with deceptive beauty, hiding the question that presses hardest. Where will the food come from now that the land sleeps under ice? For native communities, the answer was in careful foresight. Food didn't appear in January, it had to be hunted, gathered, dried, and stored months earlier, with incredible precision. You step outside and crunch toward a pit dug deep into frozen earth, its top covered with logs, reeds, and snow. The ground itself has become pantry and freezer, preserving dried corn, squash, beans, and meat. You tug open a lid, and a gust of cold air carries the smell of smoked bison, rich and smoky, even after weeks underground. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Iroquois, among others, relied on underground caches to keep the Three Sisters corn, beans, and squash safe through bitter winters. These crops, grown in summer fields, were dried and stored, their balance of nutrients forming a foundation for survival. Without them, long nights would have been unbearable. But here's a quirky little tidbit that might make you grin. Sometimes children dared each other to sneak into storage pits at night to steal dried berries, only to fall in and be stuck until morning. Imagine the laughter or scolding when a youngster was discovered curled on top of sacks of beans, guilty smile frozen on their face. Scholars, though, still debate exactly how widespread and reliable these pits were. Some argue that in regions with heavy flooding, underground caches would have been risky, while others insist people adapted with raised granaries or bark-covered bins. Archaeology shows both, suggesting communities were endlessly flexible in their fight against hunger. The storage itself tells a story of ritual. Food wasn't simply dumped into holes. It was packed carefully, meat layered with grass to keep it dry, corn bound in braided husks, berries sealed in clay jars. The earth's chill kept mold and rot at bay. You lower a hand into the cache, feel the texture of dried kernels, smooth and firm, and marvel at the forethought behind every handful. Some families stored meat high above ground too, in platforms lashed to trees, safe from wolves and bears. You picture smoke still clinging to strips of jerky, swaying gently in icy wind. When taken down and boiled into stews, those pieces swelled again with life, filling bellies and spirits alike. And oh, the stews. Picture yourself seated by fire, clay pot simmering, scent of venison mixing with parched corn and dried squash. The aroma alone would make you forget how long the nights were. Thick, hearty, filling, it wasn't luxury, but in the silence of winter, it was joy. Sometimes scarcity loomed, despite preparation. The hunger moon, late in winter, was notorious for emptying pits too soon. People chewed leather, drank broth made from bones already boiled once, even gnawed on scraps of bark. The body thinned, but the spirit endured, holding out for the first thaw. Food stores also played into trust. A family's pit wasn't just sustenance, it was status. Those who prepared well could share, gaining gratitude and alliances. Those who failed might beg or face shame. You sense how every bite carried weight beyond the stomach, shaping relationships and reputations across the village. And there were tricks you'd never expect. Fish was sometimes dried and powdered into flour, mixed with berries to form portable cakes. Fat, rendered from buffalo or bear, was mixed with dried meat and fruit to create pemmican dense, greasy, enduring. Imagine holding one of those bars in your hand, heavy as stone, knowing it contained the strength to walk another day. Step back from the pit, seal it again, and you notice the landscape differently. Every mound of snow might hide food. Every tree could shelter smoked meat. Every lodge, every cache, is part of a network designed to make winter survivable. It's like living inside a giant puzzle where each piece must be in place before the snow falls. Back inside, bowls are handed out. You sip slowly, the stew warming throat and chest, and feel gratitude ripple through you. You know that without the foresight of summer, without the wisdom buried in these pits, you'd be staring out at frozen emptiness, waiting for hunger to hollow you out. But instead, you breathe steam from the bowl, let it fog your lashes, and whisper thanks to those who filled the earth with food long before the snow arrived. Your belly is warm from last night's stew, But the fire's glow cannot disguise the reality stored food alone will never be enough. To survive months of snow, people had to step out into that frozen wilderness and wrestle life from it. So you pull on your heavy robe, tie it close, and step into the brittle morning air. Your breath clouds instantly. The silence is broken only by the creak of snow under your feet and the faint snort of animals in the distance. Hunting in deep snow was not just skill, it was art. The great herds of elk, deer, and bison didn't simply hand themselves over. They moved constantly, noses down, pawing at snow to reach frozen grasses. For you and your companions, the challenge was tracking them before hunger tracked you. A mainstream historical fact. Plains hunters often used snowshoes to spread weight across the drifts, letting them glide across surfaces that would swallow unprepared feet. Elk or bison, heavy and plodding, could sink deep, slowing them down. That advantage, slim though it was, meant the difference between bringing meat home or returning empty-handed. You can feel the tug of leather bindings around your ankles, the spring of willow frames underfoot, each step a careful bounce across white powder. And here's a quirky tidbit to picture. Some hunters deliberately mimicked animal calls, not just to lure prey but to prank each other in the woods. Imagine trudging through a snow-laden forest, ears straining for a deer's grunt only to discover your cousin's stifling laughter behind a tree. You'd probably throw a snowball at him, then sigh and keep moving, because food was too serious to waste much time joking. Yet scholars still debate just how much big game hunting actually fed winter communities. Did the bulk of calories come from these hunts, or were they supplements to stored crops and dried fish? The evidence is patchy, scattered bones in frozen soil telling stories too faint to finalize. Perhaps both were true hunts offered bursts of abundance, but storage kept bellies from collapsing in between. You crouch low now, scanning the horizon. The air stings your nostrils, sharp as broken glass, but then you see it, a line of dark humps against snow, steam rising from nostrils. Bison. They plod slowly, legs heavy in drifts, and you feel your pulse quicken. A hunting party fans out, bows in hand, arrows fletched with feathers stiff from frost. The chase is brutal. Snow drags at your calves, arrows whistle, thudding into hides. The bison lunge, bellow, crash against the weight of snow. The ground trembles under their attempt to flee, but the snow slows them, and hunters press forward. You feel the heat in your chest, sweat freezing at your temples, the mix of fear and exhilaration as muscle and willpower collide in this icy theatre. When the beast finally collapses, the silence is shocking. The snorting, crashing chaos dissolves into still air. Hunters kneel, hands resting briefly on the animal's flank, whispering words of respect. Because here, killing was not mere necessity, it was relationship. Life given, life sustained. The butchering is swift, precise. Knives of bone or metal slice through hide, steam rising from warm flesh into frozen air. Meat is cut into strips, fat rendered, bones cracked for marrow. Nothing wasted. You smell blood, iron sharp against snow, mixed with smoke as fires are lit to begin drying the prize immediately. Even the hide will become clothing, blankets, or shelter. You feel a shiver of gratitude run down your spine, stronger than the chill. There are dangers, too. A wounded animal in snow is twice as unpredictable, capable of crushing hunters beneath hooves, and predators lurk at the edges, wolves scenting blood, watching for scraps or weakness. You glance at the tree line and swear you see movement, eyes glinting. The hunt feeds many, not just people. By the time meat is packed, your arms ache from lifting, your breath rattles from cold air, and the sun already dips low, light bouncing pink across endless white. Returning to camp, snowshoes drag behind, sleds laden with meat, spirits higher than they've been in weeks. Tonight there will be feasting, stories, laughter ringing louder than the howling wind. And as you sink down by the fire, robe heavy across your shoulders, you realize hunting in snow was never only about survival. It was a test of endurance, cooperation, respect, and wit. Without it, hunger would hollow the long nights into misery. With it, the world tastes rich again, even if only for a while. Your breath curls into the air as dawn sharpens into a pale blue morning. The snow crunches underfoot, but today's task isn't stalking bison through drifts. Instead, you head toward the frozen river, where the world has gone still beneath a hard shell of ice. The air smells faintly of water, even under layers of snow, and you can hear the muffled groan of ice shifting like an old house settling in the cold. Fishing through ice holes was as much patience as it was skill. You kneel, mittens tugging at the snow, scraping down until the opaque surface gleams in front of you. Then a sharpened bone tool, or later, an iron-tipped spear punches through, sending cracks spidering outward. Cold water wells up, dark and silent, carrying the faint shimmer of unseen movement below. You dip your hands near the hole, and the chill bites like needles. Even a second too long, and your skin aches purple. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The Ojibwe and Cree were among the peoples who perfected ice fishing, lowering weighted lines with hooks carved from bone or antler. Sometimes they used spears, standing patiently over the hole, waiting for shadows of fish to glide past beneath. That patience was rewarded with pike, sturgeon, or perch, food as precious as gold in the lean months. And here's a quirky tidbit that makes you grin. Some communities dropped shiny beads of copper or shells into the holes, not just as lures but as offerings to water spirits. Imagine kneeling by the ice, whispering a quick prayer, then watching your cousin drop in what looks like a fashion accessory, insisting it will charm the fish. Practical? Maybe. Symbolic? Absolutely. But scholars still question how much winter diets truly depended on this practice. Were these fishing expeditions a core lifeline or a supplementary treat when hunts failed? Archaeological traces of fish bones appear in some winter camps, absent in others. Perhaps the answer is simple. Where rivers and lakes were plentiful, so was fish. Where ice was treacherous, people turned elsewhere. You lean over the hole now, eyes straining. The water glimmers, shifting shapes teasing your imagination. The world above fades, and all that exists is this dark, trembling circle. Then a flicker. You spear downward, water splashing your arms, and haul up a fish, its scales flashing like polished stone in the weak sunlight. Steam rises as its body hits the cold air. Relief floods you. One fish means a meal, maybe more if luck holds. Back at the lodge, the fish is roasted over fire or boiled into broth with dried corn. The smell fills the air, rich and savory, steam fogging the ceiling. You sip the broth, warmth running down your throat, filling your belly with comfort. The taste is simple yet deep, proof that even a frozen river has generosity to give. The scene isn't always solemn. Children cluster by the holes, daring each other to stick fingers into icy water, shrieking when the cold sears their skin. Adults laugh, shaking their heads, remembering their own childhood dares. Dogs nose close, curious, only to jump back when icy spray hits their fur. Even in survival, humor bubbles up like spring water. The act of fishing also builds connection. You imagine elders murmuring songs to the water, teaching younger ones to listen for subtle shifts of current under the ice. These are not just tricks of the trade, they are threads of memory, keeping culture alive through repetition, winter after winter. Night comes, stars piercing the sky, but the ice holes remain. Some are covered with brush to keep them open until morning. The frozen river creaks and sighs, reminding you that beneath your feet a whole world of life waits. You pull your robe tighter, grateful for what the water has given, and whisper thanks into the icy dark. Because in winter's heart, even a single fish can mean hope, and hope, like warmth, is what keeps you moving into the next frozen day. The morning is sharp, brittle with frost, and the snow under your moccasins squeaks like crushed glass. The horizon stretches wide and white, and you realize how impossible it would be to cover distance here without cleverness. Your legs alone won't carry you far when the world has swallowed itself in drifts. That's why the people around you learned long ago to bend the landscape to their will, not by brute force, but by ingenuity. Mobility in deep winter was a test of invention. Snowshoes, sleds, toboggans, even travois dragged behind dogs, each was a tool forged by necessity. You slip your foot into a snowshoe, the willow frame creaking faintly, leather bindings snug around your ankle. You take a step and marvel at how it spreads your weight, letting you float instead of sink. The sensation is strange at first, as though you're walking on tennis rackets, but the freedom of movement across the white expanse is worth every wobble. A mainstream historical fact: snowshoes were not one size fits all. The Cree, for instance, favored long, narrow styles shaped like canoes to glide across open plains, while Algonquian peoples crafted shorter, rounder bear paw designs better for maneuvering through thick forests. The land itself dictated the design, proving once again that geography and culture dance together at every step. And here's a quirky tidbit to tuck in your memory. Sometimes snowshoes were so large, up to 6 feet long, that wearing them indoors was impossible. People joked about clumsy relatives who forgot to take them off, knocking over firewood and children alike. Imagine stumbling through a lodge doorway, enormous snowshoes still strapped on, only to have everyone burst into laughter as you wedge yourself like a goose stuck in a fence. Scholars still dispute just how early sleds and toboggans became essential parts of winter travel. Some argue their widespread use came after the introduction of domesticated dogs, while others believe simple dragging frames existed far earlier. Archaeology offers hints but not certainties, leaving the exact timeline buried under layers of snow and speculation. Picture a sled now, lashed with rawhide, sliding behind a team of dogs. Their paws pad silently over the crust, tongues lolling steam into the air. The sled carries meat from a hunt, hides for trade, or even children wrapped tight in furs, their faces peeking out like blossoms against the white. The sound of runners scraping across packed snow becomes almost soothing, a steady rhythm against the wind's howl. Even without dogs, people dragged toboggans themselves, shoulders straining but the load gliding smoother than if carried on backs. The genius was simplicity. Flat wood, slightly curved at the front, sliding where feet alone would falter. You can almost feel the tug in your arms, the satisfaction of watching heavy cargo skim across snow instead of sinking in. Travel was not always grim duty. Children strapped tiny snowshoes to their feet and raced each other in zigzag patterns, laughing when one toppled headfirst into a drift. Adults teased each other about clumsy spills, stories retold around the fire later with exaggerated drama. Even hardship carried laughter, because laughter lightened the load more than any sled. And yet danger was always present. A strap could snap in the middle of a journey, sending a sled sinking into powder. Ice might crack beneath weight, swallowing gear whole, or a snowstorm could erase all paths, leaving even the best prepared wanderers stumbling blind. You imagine standing in such a storm, snow whipping sideways, sled rope in your hand, wondering if you'll ever see the lodge's smoke again. But on clearer days, mobility meant opportunity. Frozen rivers became highways, slick and straight, carrying sleds farther than summer trails ever could. What was an obstacle in warm months became a blessing in cold. You stand on such a river now, listening to the groan of ice beneath, and you feel the thrill of speed as sled runners skim forward, wind tugging your hood back. By the time you return to camp, snowshoes tucked by the door and sled unloaded, you realize movement in this frozen world is more than survival. It's freedom. Without these inventions, winter would trap you in a single valley, a prisoner of snow. With them, you can hunt, trade, visit kin, and remind yourself that the land may be frozen, but you are never truly stuck. The snow lies deep outside, muffling the world into silence, but within the village there is a different sound: laughter. High-pitched, bubbling, bouncing off lodge walls. It's the sound of children at play. Survival may demand seriousness, but children resilient, restless, always find ways to make even the hardest winters shimmer with joy. Games were not only distraction, They were training. You step outside, robe wrapped tight, and see a group of children sliding down a slope on pieces of bark, their shrieks echoing like geese over the valley. The ground is hard as iron. The air stings with cold, yet their faces glow red with glee. One crashes sideways, snow exploding around him, and the others roar with laughter before hauling him up for another go. A mainstream historical fact. In many native communities, winter was the time children learned through games that mimicked adult skills. Boys practiced with small bows, shooting at snow targets, while girls played house with miniature cooking sets and doll cradles. These weren't idle toys, they were lessons in how to feed, protect, and nurture when their turn came. Here's a quirky tidbit to warm the mood. Among some groups, children fashioned snow snakes, smooth sticks carved and polished, then hurled along icy tracks to see whose slid the farthest. Picture a row of kids, eyes narrowed with fierce concentration, then squealing as one snake skids yards beyond the others. A mix of bowling, curling, and pure chaos, all on frozen ground. Historians still argue about how much formal teaching occurred during winter compared to summer. Was winter play mainly practical training disguised as fun, or was it a rare chance for pure amusement? Oral traditions hint at both, leaving us unsure whether children were conscious apprentices or just lucky beneficiaries of sneaky education. The sensory details are vivid: the crunch of snow under running feet, the snap of tiny bowstrings, the metallic tang of cold air inhaled too quickly during a chase. Breath steams like smoke signals, and mittens grow heavy with wet snow as games stretch into hours. Dogs bark at the commotion, sometimes joining in, stealing sticks or leaping after sliding children. Inside the lodges, too, games flourished. Dice made from bone, plum stones, or carved wood clattered across mats, adults and children alike leaning close to watch. The air filled with groans of disappointment and bursts of laughter at surprise wins. These games carried more than entertainment. They wove bonds of kinship, kept minds sharp, and lifted spirits when the cold threatened to smother joy. And don't forget riddles and tongue twisters. Imagine a grandmother challenging children by firelight, her eyes twinkling as she weaves riddles about animals, stars, or the spirits of snow. The children fumble, giggle, guess, and finally collapse into laughter as she reveals the answer with a sly grin. These word games stretched memory and wit, keeping language alive as surely as any bowstring practice kept hands steady. You feel the warmth of that laughter, even in the coldest night. Its insulation as real as any buffalo robe. For when children play, adults remember why they endure, to give the next generation not just survival, but joy. By the time night falls, the children are spent, cheeks flushed, voices hoarse from shouting. They tumble into hides beside the fire, still giggling softly, drifting to sleep with snow snakes and sliding hills echoing in dreams. And you realize that even in a season of hunger and hardship, the heart of a community beats strongest in its children's laughter. Night settles in early, as it always does in winter, the sun sinking before you even feel the day has begun. The village grows quiet except for the sigh of wind against the lodge walls and the steady pop of firewood. Then, as bellies fill with stew and robes are wrapped snug, a hush falls over the room. Everyone leans in, eyes catching firelight, because now it is time for the long winter gift storytelling. Storytelling was more than pastime. It was memory, instruction, entertainment, and prayer all woven together. Imagine yourself cross-legged on a mat, knees tucked close, the earthy smell of hides around you, smoke curling lazily toward the vent. The storyteller clears their throat, maybe chuckling, maybe lowering their voice to a gravelly whisper, and instantly the lodge is transformed. A mainstream historical fact. Winter was the traditional season for telling sacred tales among many native peoples. For the Lakota, Iroquois, and others, stories of tricksters, spirits, and creation were reserved for the long nights when farming and travel had ceased. This rhythm ensured tales were not lost, while also giving them a special weight. They belonged to the silence of snow. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some storytellers used props. A flick of a fur robe became the swish of a fox's tail, or a carved stick stood in as a spirit's staff. Imagine an elder waving a mitten dramatically while children squealed with delight, pretending to see an entire world in that simple gesture. Historians still debate how much improvisation storytellers allowed themselves. Were stories fixed, repeated word for word over centuries, or did each teller bend them with humor, local references, or personal flair? The evidence suggests both, with some core myths staying rigid, while side tales flexed like smoke in the firelight. You hear a voice now, low and rhythmic, recounting a tale of a trickster who stole fire from the sky. The lodge fills with gasps and laughter as the trickster's schemes unfold. Children lean forward, eyes wide, while adults smile knowingly, remembering when they were the ones enchanted by these words. The fire crackles, perfectly timed, as if joining the performance. Stories were layered too. Beneath the laughter at coyote antics or the awe of star-born heroes, there were lessons. Respect the land, share food, honor kinship. As you listen, you realize these weren't bedtime fairy tales but blueprints for survival wrapped in entertainment. The sensory experience lingers. The warmth of the fire against your shins, the chill draft brushing your neck, the shadows leaping on the lodge walls as the tale builds to its climax. The storyteller pauses just long enough for silence to stretch, then delivers the ending, and everyone exhales together, like a single breath released. Afterward, smaller voices pick up the rhythm, children retelling the story in fragments, adding giggles or changing endings for fun. Laughter echoes again, mixing with the steady hum of wind outside. You lie back, robe pulled close, the trickster's mischief still dancing in your head. And in that moment you understand. Winter is bearable not only because of food and fire, but because of stories. They are the hearth inside the mind, warming you against darkness, carrying you into sleep with echoes of ancestors' voices. The nights deepen, and as weeks slip by, the lodge becomes more than a shelter, it becomes a temple. You wake one morning to hushed voices, the kind that carry weight, and you notice that people move differently. There is no casual joking today. Instead, robes are brushed clean, faces painted with ash or ochre, and offerings are gathered. Midwinter has arrived, and with it, ceremonies of renewal. Step outside, and the air itself feels heavier. The sun hangs low, its light watery and distant, casting long shadows over endless white. Yet within the camp, the fire burns brighter, fed with extra logs, coaxed to roar and flare. It isn't just warmth today, it's symbol. Renewal depends on flame, on breath, on rhythm. Here's a mainstream historical fact. Many native communities marked the midpoint of winter with rituals designed to ensure balance between humans, animals, and unseen forces. The Iroquois held the midwinter ceremony, stretching across days of dancing, dream sharing, and masked performances to cleanse the community for the coming year. It was a reset button, pressed right when spirits sagged under winter's weight. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some traditions, children were encouraged to share dreams aloud during these ceremonies, no matter how strange. A dream of flying like a crow, of losing a moccasin in snow, even of eating too much stew, all could be interpreted by elders for hidden meaning. Imagine a solemn circle suddenly breaking into chuckles as a child proudly announces they dreamed of sleeping until spring. Maybe that was the wisest dream of all. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were primarily agricultural, tied to future planting, or whether they were spiritual maintenance for winter itself. Were they about ensuring corn would sprout in months ahead, or about keeping communities sane and hopeful through the coldest stretch? The truth may be both, layered like snow and ice on the ground. You watch as dancers circle the fire, their feet stamping rhythm into frozen earth. Drums beat steadily, deep and resonant, like the heartbeat of the world. Masks appear painted, feathered, carved into shapes that blur human and spirit. Some are terrifying, others comical, each embodying powers that dwell beyond sight. The air vibrates with song, high voices carrying prayers into the clear night sky. The smell of sage and sweetgrass smoke fills your nostrils, thick and sweet, clinging to hair and clothing. You close your eyes and feel it swirl around you, cleansing, soothing, carrying your thoughts somewhere between earth and stars. The world beyond the fire fades, and for a moment, even the sharp edge of hunger and cold softens. And then, as the firelight flickers, you notice people tossing small offerings, bits of food, carved trinkets, strands of beads into the flames. The crackle and hiss as they burn feels symbolic, giving up something small to ensure something greater in return. Children stare wide-eyed, clutching tokens before finally letting them go, as if learning the first lesson of sacrifice. By the end of the night, voices are hoarse, feet sore, and smoke thick, yet spirits feel lighter. You sense it in the way people laugh more easily, in the way their shoulders relax, as if the invisible weight of winter has been eased. You crawl back into your robe, the echoes of drums still pulsing in your chest, and you realize these ceremonies were not optional extras. They were as necessary as food caches and warm robes. Without them, the cold would gnaw not only at the body but at the soul. With them, people could endure. And so you drift into sleep, heart steady, the fire's glow mingling with the memory of masks and chants, carrying you deeper into the frozen night. The snow outside has hardened into a crust that crunches like breaking glass beneath each step. The sun is weak, a pale disk barely warming your face, and inside the lodge, the fire seems smaller than it did weeks ago. You notice it first in your belly, that slow, hollow ache that never quite leaves anymore. It is late winter now, and you have entered the season the old ones call the hunger moon. The hunger moon was notorious. By February or March, caches began to empty. The meat dried in summer was nearly gone. Corn bins showed the bottom, and the last shriveled berries had long since been chewed into paste. Everyone felt it. Children grew quieter, elders thinner, adults more irritable as hunger sharpened tempers. You can almost hear the sighs when bowls are handed out half full instead of brimming. A mainstream historical fact. Many northern tribes explicitly named their months after this ordeal. The Lakota spoke of Kanapopa-wi, the moon when trees crack from cold, which overlapped with the season of hunger, while Algonquian peoples marked February as the hunger moon itself. The names were not poetic exaggerations, they were blunt records of struggle etched into the calendar. And here's a quirky tidbit. To ward off despair, some communities staged playful mock feasts, where people pretended to gorge themselves on empty bowls, groaning and patting their bellies as though stuffed. Children giggled, adults played along, and for a short while hunger was transformed into theatre, an inside joke against the cold. Imagine the relief of laughter echoing through a lodge where actual food was scarce. Scholars still debate whether starvation was widespread or sporadic. Archaeological sites show both evidence of malnutrition and signs of abundance, leaving researchers to argue, were hunger moons an annual inevitability, or only in the harshest years? Oral histories lean toward the former, insisting it was a cycle everyone had to learn to endure. You picture the sensory reality, the metallic taste of broth boiled from bones already used once, the leathery chew of boiled hides softened just enough to swallow, the bitter nibble of tree bark stripped from branches. Your stomach tightens imagining it, but you also feel awe at the creativity that kept life going when cupboards ran bare. And yet, hunger carried lessons. It taught patience, moderation, and gratitude. It reminded people that survival wasn't a guarantee. It was earned through foresight, shared sacrifice, and resilience. The community drew closer in these lean times, trading bites of pemmican or bowls of thin corn soup so that no one, not even the weakest, was left completely empty. Still, there were darker edges. Sometimes tempers flared, and whispers of theft spread through the lodge. Imagine the tension of discovering a food pit disturbed, only to realize it was a neighbor desperate to feed their children. Mercy and anger battled in hearts already weighed down by hunger. On clearer nights, people looked skyward for comfort. The hunger moon hung cold and bright, its light spilling across the snow like silver paint. Families pointed at it, naming it aloud, reminding each other that hunger was temporary, that the cycle would turn. The moon itself became a kind of promise. Endure a little longer, and spring will return. By the fire, bellies aching, voices softened. Stories of ancestors who survived harsher winters, who walked thinner lines, were retold with reverence. Children curled against mothers, listening not only to words, but to the steady heartbeat of survival. You pull your robe tighter, feel the gnawing ache in your stomach, and realize that hunger, though cruel, was also a teacher. It carved humility, solidarity, and respect into the bones of those who endured it. And as you finally close your eyes, you whisper to yourself the same quiet prayer carried through centuries. Let this hunger moon pass quickly. The nights stretch impossibly long now, each hour of darkness folded into the next, until you lose track of time. Hunger gnaws, silence presses, and outside the world is nothing but white and shadow. It is in this bleakness that something unexpected happens. Your mind begins to wander into places beyond the body. You find yourself staring into the fire, eyes unfocused, and suddenly the flames blur into shapes, visions, whispers. Winter, with its confinement and emptiness, becomes the perfect season for dream quests. Isolation has a way of breaking down barriers. You step outside at night, the snow squeaking underfoot, your robe heavy across your shoulders. The stars are so sharp they almost hum, constellations etched brighter than in any summer sky. You lie back in the snow, breath steaming upward, and let the darkness swallow you whole. Soon the line between what is seen and what is imagined thins, and you drift into vision. A mainstream historical fact. Among plains peoples, young men sometimes fasted and sought visions in winter, retreating into solitude to meet spirit guides. The harsh conditions themselves were part of the ritual. The cold, hunger, and silence stripped away the body's comforts, opening the mind to revelations. Dreams were not entertainment. They were instruction, guiding choices in hunting, war, or healing. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some dreamers insisted that spirits preferred to speak during storms. The louder the wind shrieked outside, the clearer the messages inside. Imagine huddling beneath firs, the lodge shaking with gusts, and suddenly feeling certain that the howl carried words meant only for you. Others probably teased them afterward. Sure, the wind told you that. Must have been hungry wind. Yet the belief endured. Historians still argue how much these visions were individual quests versus communal practice. Were dream quests a rite mainly for young hunters? Or did women, elders, and children also embrace them during long winters? Oral traditions hint broadly, but interpretation remains contested, like shadows flickering on the wall. Inside the lodge, you see dream sharing woven into ceremony. A grandmother recounts a dream of a bird flying through endless snow. An uncle describes a glowing animal that led him across ice. Each dream is dissected, debated, honored. Children giggle at the strangest ones, but even those are recorded because who knows when a dream's meaning will reveal itself. You feel the sensory weight of fasting in this season. Your stomach aches, your head grows light, your breath frosts heavier in the cold. But then a clarity. The crunch of snow beneath your knees as you pray feels louder, sharper. The stars overhead seem to arrange themselves into patterns you'd never noticed. The fire's sparks shoot upward, and you swear they linger longer than physics allows. Dreams might promise power, an eagle feather gifted in vision that grants strength, or a spirit animal that vows protection. They might offer warnings, two visions of famine or enemies cloaked in white. Whatever their shape, they are received with reverence, woven into the tapestry of winter survival as surely as meat and fire. There is also humor here. Imagine a young dream seeker declaring solemnly that their spirit guide was a rabbit. The lodge would erupt in laughter, jokes flying for weeks. Yet beneath the teasing, the dream was respected. Even a rabbit could carry wisdom in its paws. By the end of such nights, your body is weary, but your mind hums with possibility. You curl beneath hides, visions swirling behind closed eyes. Maybe you dreamed of soaring above snowy forests, or of ancestors whispering from the smoke hole. You don't know yet what it means, but you do know this. In winter's deepest silence, when hunger bites and shadows lengthen, dreams are as vital as food. They remind you that even in frozen nights, the spirit continues to roam free. The lodge feels close and heavy, the air thick with smoke and the faint musk of hides. Around you, coughs echo more often now. Winter is not just about hunger and cold, it is about sickness. You hear a child wheezing softly, a grandmother clearing her throat again and again, and you know that remedies must be found or illness will spread like fire through dry grass. Native communities had centuries of practice in tending the body through frozen months. Medicines weren't stored in glass jars or metal tins. They lived in roots, bark, smoke, and prayer. You watch as an elder kneels beside the fire, unwrapping a bundle of dried plants. The scent rises instantly sharp, earthy, with a sweetness underneath. The air feels different, as though the plants themselves breathe life back into the room. A mainstream historical fact: the Haudenosaunee, Iroquois, and many other peoples used white pine as a winter remedy, boiling needles into a tea, rich in vitamin C, to ward off scurvy when fresh foods were impossible. You sip the hot liquid now, its taste resinous and tangy, and you can almost feel it warming your chest, pushing back weakness. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some groups believed skunk oil, rendered carefully and stored in tiny containers, was a cure for chest congestion. Picture yourself gagging at the thought, only to be told sternly by an elder, "Yes, it stinks, but so does dying." You'd pinch your nose and swallow, hoping your lungs would thank you later. Scholars still argue about the line between medicine and ceremony. Was the smoke of burning sage, cedar, or sweetgrass primarily antibacterial, or primarily spiritual cleansing? The modern world wants tidy categories, but in winter lodges, both purposes were one. Healing was never only physical, it was emotional, communal, sacred. You picture the sensory world of these remedies, the bitter taste of willow bark tea, the soothing coolness of poultices pressed against swollen joints, the rhythmic rattle of gourds shaken during healing chants. The lodge fills with layers of smell, pine, cedar, smoke, and sweat, creating an atmosphere that is both sickroom and sanctuary. Healing was often a performance of sound as much as touch. Chants rose and fell, voices weaving patterns that carried power. You hear the hum of an elder's voice, low and steady, vibrating in your bones. Children listen with wide eyes, uncertain whether to fear or trust the strange cadence, but gradually they relax, lulled by rhythm and repetition. Sickness tested community bonds. A family might share its last bit of precious herbs with a neighbor's child. Women worked tirelessly, boiling teas and massaging limbs, while men carved new pipes or rattles for ceremonies meant to chase sickness away. Everyone took part, because illness was everyone's enemy. Yet there was humor, even here. Imagine someone choking down a vile brew, grimacing so fiercely that children burst into laughter, shouting, "You look like you swallowed a frog." Laughter eased the gloom, making medicine taste just a little less bitter. And survival often meant believing in the cure. When the elder laid hands on your chest, when smoke washed over your face, when chants echoed around the lodge, you felt lighter, calmer. Whether by chemistry, spirit, or suggestion, healing took hold. As the coughs quiet and breath eases, you curl into your robe again, the faint tang of pine still on your tongue. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, healing whispers remind you that resilience isn't only about strength. It is about knowing what roots to boil, what prayers to sing, what faith to hold. And in winter, that knowledge mattered as much as fire itself. The days blur into long stretches of grey light and longer stretches of darkness. Outside, the wind never stops moaning, like a restless animal prowling around the lodges. Inside, warmth flickers from fire, but the walls press close. You sit cross-legged, robe heavy across your shoulders, and notice the rhythms of a household sealed into one room for months at a time. Close quarters test patience as much as the cold tests bodies. Clan bonds in confinement became the forge where tempers sparked and kinship strengthened. Picture a family of 10 sharing a single earth lodge, smoke curling toward the vent, dogs curled in corners, children tussling on furs. Privacy was impossible. Every sigh, every whisper, every snore was public property. Yet somehow, these walls held not only endurance but intimacy, a mainstream historical fact. Ethnographers recorded how the Mandan and Hidatsa earth lodges in the northern plains could house multiple families, each with designated sleeping spaces around the perimeter. The central fire was shared, turning strangers into daily companions. Winters could stretch 5 or 6 months, meaning whole seasons lived shoulder to shoulder. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some families carved little notches into the lodge poles to keep tally of arguments. Each notch marked a quarrel, and by spring, some poles looked like porcupines. Imagine the laughter or embarrassment when elders teased, "Looks like you had more fights than firewood this year." But scholars still argue whether these close quarters fostered more conflict or more unity. Were households powder kegs of resentment waiting for spring, or crucibles where kinship deepened beyond measure? Oral histories point in both directions, perhaps proving that confinement revealed character rather than creating it. You feel the sensory details vividly, the heat of too many bodies in one space, sweat mingling with smoke, the constant shuffle of feet as people shift places. Children's laughter bursts, then crying follows, then lullabies soothe. Adults mutter over chores, women sewing, men repairing tools, all within earshot of each other's secrets. And gossip. Oh, the gossip thrived. With nowhere else to go, stories multiplied like sparks in dry grass. Who was lazy at gathering wood? Who slipped on ice and landed backside first in snow? Who was seen sneaking extra bites of stew? You grin, imagining the mix of exasperation and amusement that filled long nights when talk was the only entertainment left. Yet there were moments of tenderness too. Elders told stories from their youth, voices softening as children leaned close. Parents hummed songs, weaving comfort through the smoke. Young people shared secret glances in the flicker of firelight, hearts racing despite the ever-watchful eyes. Even quarrels, once cooled, could transform into laughter the next day, bonds mended as quickly as they frayed. Dogs stretched, snoring loudly, a reminder that not even animals escaped the cramped chaos. You pull your robe tighter, half irritated by the smell, half grateful for the warmth of bodies packed close. For in this confinement, you realize something important. Survival wasn't only about fending off cold, it was about fending off loneliness. The community was the insulation. Even when tempers flared, even when snoring drove you half mad, being pressed together meant no one faced winter alone. That closeness, uncomfortable though it was, became the true shelter. And as you drift toward sleep, lulled by the hum of voices around you, you sense that endurance is not just measured in hides or wood, but in patience, humor, and the willingness to share every breath of a long, frozen night. The fire burns steady in the lodge, its glow flickering across busy hands. Today the air hums with the quiet rhythm of needles piercing hide, beads clicking into place, threads pulled taut. Winter may lock the world in snow, but inside, women's work fills the hours with industry and beauty. Women's winter labor was not light or idle, it was the backbone of survival. While men hunted and scouted, women sewed, tanned, preserved, and repaired. You watch as a mother sits cross-legged, a buffalo hide draped across her knees. Her fingers, calloused and steady, scrape the flesh side clean with a bone tool, each stroke deliberate. The smell of smoke and fat mixes with the earthy tang of hides, filling the lodge with an almost tangible heaviness. A mainstream historical fact. Among the plains peoples, Women were primarily responsible for tanning hides, turning raw buffalo skins into robes, moccasins, and teepee covers. The process took days scraping, stretching, rubbing with animal brains to soften, and finally smoking to waterproof. Without their constant work, the community would face the cold wrapped in nothing but brittle rawhide. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women teased that they could tell a man's skill in hunting by how much extra work he gave them. A sloppy skinning job meant hours of extra scraping, and hunters who brought back messy hides often endured good-natured scolding. Picture a woman muttering, "Did you chase this buffalo through a thorn bush before skinning it?" while the lodge bursts into laughter. Historians continue to debate the balance of authority tied to this labor. Did women's indispensable work grant them quiet power in decision-making, or was it undervalued in the shadow of men's hunts? Accounts differ. Some point to councils where women's voices guided policy, others to records where their authority was muted. The truth, like a well-tanned hide, was likely layered and flexible. You hear the sounds of the lodge, the steady scrape of stone tools, the thump of hide stretched tighter over a frame, the sharp snap of sinew thread pulled through. The air is punctuated by children's laughter as girls practice sewing with miniature kits, mimicking their mothers, giggling when stitches knot awkwardly. Boys sneak glances, half teasing, but they know their survival will one day depend on those careful stitches too. Beadwork glimmers in the firelight. Tiny bits of shell, bone, and later glass strung into patterns that tell stories of lineage, spirits, and memory. Robes are not only warm, they are canvases. Each bead sewn in winter was a quiet declaration. We endure, but we also create beauty in the harshest season. You run your fingers across a finished design, feeling both artistry and necessity fused together. Food preparation continues too. Women stir stews, grind dried corn, and tend meat drying by the fire. The rhythm of work is constant, punctuated by conversation, jokes, even songs hummed under breath. The smell of cooking mingles with the scent of smoke and hides, wrapping the senses in layers of survival. And there is humor in the monotony. Someone's thread snaps, scattering beads into the fire, and everyone groans. A child chews on sinew when no one is looking, spitting it out with exaggerated disgust. A dog sneaks close, snatching scraps, chased out with laughter and mock curses. Even in endless work, moments of levity keep spirits warm. By nightfall, progress is visible. Finished moccasins lined with fur, robes soft and pliable, beads glittering faintly in firelight. The women sigh, stretch sore shoulders, and smile at one another. Their labor has stitched another layer of protection around the community, as essential as the fire itself. You curl under a hide, listening to the faint hum of a lullaby, the song of tired women soothing restless children, and you realize their work is not just labor. It is love made tangible, sewn into every seam, smoked into every hide, preserved in every jar. Without it, winter would be unbearable. With it, the long nights are softened, warmed, and adorned with quiet grace. The lodge glows faintly with morning light filtering through the smoke hole. Men sit gathered near the fire, their voices low, steady, and deliberate. The women's sewing still hums in the background. But today, your ears tune to the circle of men, where council takes place. In the heart of winter, decisions grow sharper, just like the air outside. Men's councils were more than idle conversation. These gatherings shaped the future of hunts, defense, diplomacy, and trade. You kneel closer, feeling the warmth on your face, listening as voices overlap, then fall quiet again. A stick is passed, signaling whose turn it is to speak, each word weighed like precious stones in the silence. A mainstream historical fact. Councils were central to governance across native nations, from the Iroquois Confederacy's Grand Council in the northeast to smaller village circles on the plains. Even in harsh winters, these meetings continued, because strategy could not wait for spring. Issues of territory, raids, alliances, and hunting routes all demanded foresight. But here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes council meetings went so long that men deliberately snuck snacks into their robes. Dried meat or a lump of pemmican was hidden, and they'd chew discreetly while pretending to listen with stoic patience. Imagine the suppressed chuckles when someone was caught mid-bite, elders scolding with mock severity. Even in hunger, we must keep dignity. Historians still argue over how inclusive these councils really were. Were women's voices completely absent, or did influence flow indirectly through kinship ties? Some records show women reminding husbands what to say. Others point to female clan leaders shaping decisions behind the scenes. The debate lingers, like smoke twisting uncertainly toward the vent. You picture the atmosphere. The snap of wood in the fire punctuates speeches. The faint whistle of wind outside underlines pauses. The smell of smoke and dried hides settles heavy in your nose. Every so often, a child shuffles closer to listen, eyes wide, before being shooed gently away. Decisions are not made quickly here, they simmer, like stew, drawing flavor from patience. The topics vary. A hunter proposes sending scouts farther west, chasing rumors of bison herds where the snow is lighter. Another suggests strengthening alliances with neighbors, trading hides for corn. Voices rise, tempers flare briefly, then laughter diffuses the tension. You can almost see the sparks of humor, someone teasing another about exaggerating the size of a herd or mocking a clumsy snowshoe fall from yesterday. Even in solemn matters, laughter threads its way through. And then, silence deepens as an elder begins to speak. His voice is raspy, weighted with decades of winters. Everyone leans in. He reminds the council of past mistakes, of hunts lost to arrogance, of treaties broken by haste. His words roll like the low growl of thunder, a warning that wisdom cannot be rushed. Sometimes, visions or dreams are shared here too. A man describes an animal that appeared in sleep, its message cryptic but urgent. The circle murmurs, debating its meaning, deciding whether to heed it as guidance or dismiss it as imagination. You realize how tightly woven spirituality and governance were decisions grounded in both logic and dream. The council ends slowly, as all things in winter do. There is no grand declaration, no gavel or closing ceremony. Instead, men nod to each other, decisions absorbed into the rhythm of daily life. Tomorrow, hunters will set out. Soon, envoys will walk across snow to neighbors. The future has been shaped quietly, like footprints pressed into a drifting path. As you curl back under your robe, the voices still echo in your ears. You understand that survival was never just about hunting or sowing, it was about planning together, hearing every voice, balancing needs against risks. In the stillness of winter, the fire of council burned as brightly as any hearth. The night is bone cold, the kind of stillness where even the snow seems to hold its breath. You step outside the lodge for a moment, hood pulled tight, and your breath hangs like smoke in the dark. The stars shimmer cold and hard, and the world feels inhabited by more than just people. In this silence, you sense presences beings not of flesh and fur, but of frost and shadow. Winter, in every community, was more than a season. It was alive. Spiritual guardians of the cold were invoked, respected, sometimes feared. You imagine standing at the edge of a frozen river, hearing the ice groan beneath, and feeling certain a spirit moves underfoot. To live through winter was to live in dialogue with these unseen forces. A mainstream historical fact. The Inuit spoke of mahaha, mischievous frost spirits said to tickle victims to death with icy fingers, and others of a giant woman who controlled the seals. Among the Cree, figures like the Wendigo embodied hunger and greed, haunting the forest during the hungriest months. These beings weren't bedtime stories, they were warnings made flesh, teaching children caution and adults humility. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some tribes believed frost patterns on windows or on animal hides left outside were actual handwriting from winter spirits. Children were told to read the patterns like letters, interpreting whether the spirits were pleased or annoyed. Imagine waking up, your lodge wall glittering with frost, and someone announcing, "Well, The spirits say you'd better share your stew tonight. Historians still argue whether these spirits were taken literally or whether they were metaphors for human behavior. Was Wendigo a monster in the woods, or the embodiment of selfishness in times of scarcity? The debate endures, because stories lived in both realms at once, real enough to fear, symbolic enough to teach. The sensory world of these beliefs is vivid. You hear the howl of wind, shrill and unending, and it feels like voices. You see the glint of moonlight on snow, dazzling your eyes until it seems alive. You smell the sharp, metallic cold, and it carries a hint of presence, as if something unseen has just brushed past. Even your skin prickles when gusts slip beneath your robe, like fingers pressing too close. Ceremonies sometimes sought to appease these guardians. Offerings of food were placed in the snow, or chants sung into the storm. A hunter might whisper to the frost before leaving, promising respect if safe passage was granted. You feel the weight of those small gestures, superstition to some, survival strategy to others. Children both feared and loved these tales. By firelight, wide eyes stared as elders recounted nights when Wendigo's howl was heard, or when ice beings wandered near camp. Later, tucked into hides, the children clung closer to parents, hearts racing, yet secretly thrilled by the story's chill. Fear became entertainment, but also education. Even humor found its way in. Picture someone sneezing violently in the lodge, only to be told, "Ah, the frost spirit just walked through you." The laughter breaks tension, reminding everyone that even in reverence, you can poke fun at your fears. As you crawl back under robes, wind shrieking outside, you understand why these guardians mattered. Winter was too vast, too deadly, to face without giving it personality. By speaking to it, naming it, people lessened its power. The spirits of frost and hunger were not only monsters to be dreaded, they were companions to be negotiated with, reminders of respect in a world where nature always had the last word. The wind rattles the smoke hole, and sparks leap upward as the fire is fed another log. You look around the lodge and notice how many objects are handmade, how every item is shaped by cleverness. Winter, more than any other season, demanded tools that turned scraps into survival. With no markets or blacksmiths nearby, people relied on bone, wood, and sinew to fashion what was needed. You crouch beside a man smoothing a piece of caribou bone against stone. Slowly, the edge sharpens into a scraper, ready to clean hides or shave wood. The sound is steady grind, 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 until the tool feels almost like an extension of his hand. Nothing here is wasted. Every rib, antler, or broken branch becomes something useful. A mainstream historical fact, bone tools were widespread among native peoples, from awls used in sewing to fishhooks carved from antler tips. In winter, when resources were scarce, these items were lifelines. Snow knives made from caribou ribs cut blocks of snow for shelter, while sled runners shaped from wood and reinforced with bone carried loads over frozen ground. Ingenuity replaced abundance. Here's a quirky tidbit that makes you smile. Some families crafted mittens with little bone toggles at the wrist so they could be snapped together like a pair of clamshells. That way, no one lost a mitten in the snow, because if you've ever lost one mitten in midwinter, you know the misery that follows. Imagine kids stomping around, mittens clacking together like castanets, turning necessity into comedy. Historians still dispute how much outside trade influenced these winter tools. Were certain designs like iron-tipped scrapers or metal blades borrowed quickly from Europeans? Or did older bone and wood traditions remain dominant longer than records suggest? Archaeological finds reveal both side by side, suggesting a mix of innovation and tradition, but the timeline is hazy. You handle a scraper now, the smooth bone surprisingly warm against your palm, the edges sharp enough to cut through hide, yet light enough for long use. Beside it, a bow drill spins, wood squealing as sparks leap into tinder. The smell of smoke, resin, and freshly scraped hide fills your nostrils, mingling with the musky warmth of bodies. Sinew, stripped from animal tendons, becomes string, thread, glue. You picture a woman threading beads onto sinew strands, or a man stringing his bow tight, the fibers humming under tension. Every tendon that once pulled muscle is given new life as cordage, connecting winter tasks to the animal's gift. Even children joined in tool-making. Boys carved miniature bows, girls practiced stitching scraps, their clumsy hands turning practice into skill. The laughter of a child breaking a bone all too quickly might echo through the lodge, met with gentle teasing but also encouragement. Each mistake was part of the long apprenticeship of survival. Tools were often decorated too. A bone scraper might bear incised lines, a wooden handle wrapped in dyed sinew. Beauty and utility walked hand in hand. You run your fingers over one such carving, feeling the grooves like a secret signature, a message from the maker to the future user. I was here. I endured. And in the darkest nights, these tools took on almost magical significance. A hunter might whisper thanks to his snow knife before cutting into drifts. A woman might stroke her awl like a companion, knowing her family's warmth depended on its point. Objects became partners, companions in the long battle against cold. As you settle back, a finished pair of bone-handled scrapers drying by the fire, you realize that these tools weren't just instruments. They were proof of human creativity, shaped from what little the frozen world allowed. And each one told the same truth. Survival isn't only about strength, it's about turning fragments into lifelines, making warmth from what seems like nothing. The lodge walls tremble faintly, and you wake with a start. At first you think it's only the wind, but then you hear it, the rising roar, the low howl that swells until it drowns everything else. A blizzard is coming. The air inside grows anxious even before the snow strikes, because everyone knows how quickly whiteouts can turn the world into a trap. Step outside for just a second, and you feel it. Flakes sting your face like thrown sand. The wind tears at your hood, and the horizon vanishes. Within minutes the camp disappears, swallowed by a curtain of swirling white. Your own footprints vanish behind you, erased as though you were never there. A mainstream historical fact. Explorers and anthropologists recorded that many tribes, from the Lakota on the plains to the Inuit in the Arctic, learned to treat blizzards as walls rather than paths. Travel ceased, hunts were postponed, and lodges were sealed tight. People hunkered down, conserving fuel and food until the storm passed. It was less about fighting the storm than outwaiting it. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some people believed blizzards carried voices of lost ancestors. The wind's howl was said to be their lament or their laughter, depending on the pitch. Children pressed close to elders, asking nervously, "Who is speaking tonight?" Imagine the mixture of fear and comfort in believing that loved ones were rushing past in the storm. Historians still dispute whether blizzards were more often deadly or simply disruptive. Archaeological evidence of abandoned winter camps suggests storms could force relocation. But oral traditions also describe families snug in lodges, laughing through the howl outside. Perhaps it depended on preparation whether the firewood pile was high enough, the caches full enough, the hides patched tight. You feel the sensory crush of it now, the sting of ice against your skin, the roar that fills your ears until your own thoughts seem muffled, the sharp metallic taste of snow when you gasp for breath. Even inside, the storm seeps in. The wind moans through cracks, smoke hole covers flap, and snow dust drifts across the floor, melting into damp patches. Inside the lodge, families pull tighter together. Extra hides are draped across the door, children tucked into furs. Firewood is fed cautiously, too much too soon, and you risk running out. Too little, and the cold will creep in. Every crackle of the fire feels precious, every flicker of flame a shield against the roaring chaos outside. And yet, even here, humor finds space. Someone sneezes as snow dust falls through a gap, and another mutters, "The storm spirits are shaking their blankets again." Laughter ripples softly, easing the fear, because fear shared becomes lighter. The danger is real. Step outside, unprepared, and you'll lose your bearings in seconds. Hunters caught in the open might wander in circles until exhaustion takes them. Frostbite creeps fast, fingers stiffening before you realize it. Stories circulate of people found frozen only yards from camp, snow covering them as if tucking them in for a final sleep. You shiver at the thought, pulling your robe closer. But storms always pass. When the howl finally softens and the white curtain clears, the world outside is transformed. Drifts mound high against lodges, trees bend under their new weight, and the landscape looks entirely new, like a blank page. You step out cautiously, blinking in the sudden silence, your breath curling upward into crisp, shining air. And you realize a blizzard was never only a storm. It was a reminder of humility, a teacher of patience, a test of preparation. You cannot command it, only endure it. And if you endure together, the memory becomes another story told by firelight, another notch of survival carved against winter's endless teeth. The snow outside gleams under the thin moon, the world looking almost calm after the storm. But calm is an illusion. You sit by the fire, chewing slowly on dried meat, and you feel it a prickle at the back of your neck, a sense of eyes beyond the lodge walls. Hunger isn't just gnawing at you, it gnaws at every living thing in this frozen world. Predators prowl when prey grows scarce, and winter pushes them closer than you'd ever like. Wolves are the first you notice. Their howls roll across the valley, long and mournful, the sound threading through smoke holes and chilling spines. The pack moves silently, paws whispering across snow crust, breath steaming from sharp muzzles. You step outside cautiously, and your torchlight glints off eyes yellow, steady, unblinking. They don't charge. Not yet. They're waiting, watching, testing whether weakness lives inside these walls. A mainstream historical fact: wolves were both feared and respected by native peoples. Some plains tribes admired their endurance, modeling hunting strategies after pack behavior. Others told stories of wolves as teachers or guides, but in lean winters, they were also competitors, circling camps, scavenging scraps, even snatching dogs or children if vigilance slipped. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some stories claimed that if you left food out for wolves during deep winter, they would remember and spare you in the future. Imagine elders tossing scraps into the snow, muttering, "Better to buy their favor now than lose a dog tomorrow." A superstition perhaps, but one born of coexistence with sharp teeth. Historians still debate how often predators truly threatened villages. Were wolf attacks rare, inflated into legend, or common enough to be a regular fear? Accounts differ wildly, with some explorers describing constant harassment and others dismissing it as myth. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Fear magnifies memory, but wolves circling hungry camps was real enough. It wasn't just wolves. Mountain lions padded the edges of forests, their movements silent as shadows. A sudden scream in the night might send hunters rushing with torches, only to find paw prints leading back into darkness. Bears, though mostly hibernating, sometimes emerged restless, driven by hunger to paw at caches or tear into frozen hides. Each predator was a reminder that humans weren't the only ones desperate for calories. The sensory world tightens around you, the musky scent of wolf fur carried faintly on the wind, the crunch of paws circling outside the firelight, the low growl that vibrates in your chest more than in your ears. Your skin prickles, your breath catches, because you know how thin the barrier is between safety and intrusion. Inside the lodge, tension sharpens. Dogs snarl, hackles high, every ear tuned outward. Hunters grip bows and spears, eyes darting to the door. Children huddle closer, whispering questions in urgent voices. Elders murmur calming words, but even their eyes flicker nervously toward the sounds outside. Survival becomes a contest of patience: who will break first, man or beast? And yet, even here, humor sneaks in. Picture someone rolling their eyes as wolves howl yet again, muttering, "There go our neighbors singing off-key." Laughter bubbles briefly, a tiny rebellion against the fear pressing in. Eventually, Hunger drives predators elsewhere, or hunters venture out with courage and torches, driving them back. The howls fade, the eyes vanish, and silence settles again. You exhale, shoulders loosening, only now realizing how tightly you'd been holding yourself. Back by the fire, stew bubbling faintly, you reflect on what those prowling shadows mean. They're reminders that humans aren't rulers of this frozen world, only participants in its endless struggle. You survive because of wit, cooperation, and firelight. The predators survive because of teeth, stealth, and hunger. In winter, all of you share the same goal: to see spring. The storm has passed, the predators have retreated, and now the village stirs with a different kind of energy. Word spreads that it is time to travel, not to hunt this time, but to meet others. Winter may isolate, but it also connects. Frozen rivers, once barriers in summer, now lie hard and slick underfoot, turning into highways of ice. Bundled figures step onto the glittering surface, sleds creaking, goods lashed tight. Trading and alliances in snow are about to begin. You imagine yourself trudging alongside a dog-drawn sled, your breath rising in clouds, each step a crunch on the glassy surface of the river. The sound echoes strangely, as if the ice itself hums beneath you. Villages that in warmer months were weeks apart suddenly feel close. The land, locked in frost, opens surprising pathways. A mainstream historical fact: native communities often used winter gatherings to trade goods that were hard to carry during other seasons. The Lakota, Cree, and Ojibwe, among others, traveled to exchange hides, dried meat, corn, fish, shells, and even stories. Diplomatic councils were timed for these meetings, cementing bonds that lasted long beyond the snow. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some travelers marked their sleds or bundles with funny little charms, feathers, carved animals, even children's toys, so they could spot their goods quickly in a pile. Imagine a busy winter camp, sleds lined up, and someone calling out, "Who owns the one with the tiny wooden goose tied to it?" A practical trick, yes, but also a spark of personality in a frozen world. Historians still debate how extensive these winter networks really were. Did trade extend hundreds of miles across snow, or was it mostly local exchanges between neighboring bands? Archaeological finds suggest both shells from far coasts appearing deep inland, copper from distant lakes carried into the plains, but exactly how much of that occurred in winter remains uncertain. You step into a meeting camp now, where fires dot the snow like constellations fallen to earth. The air buzzes with voices in multiple languages, laughter carrying over the crackle of flames. Women unwrap bundles, laying out goods for inspection. Men clasp hands, offering greetings that feel warmer than any fire. Children dart between lodges, their eyes wide at new faces, dogs, and accents. The sensory world is rich. The smell of smoked fish mingling with bison fat, the clink of shell beads traded for furs, the bright flash of dyed quills stitched into garments. Your fingers trail over a blanket woven from another tribe's skill, marveling at its texture, while someone else admires the beadwork on your moccasins. Trade is more than barter. It is admiration, curiosity, and the thrill of novelty in a season that otherwise repeats itself endlessly. And there is politics, too. Councils form on the edge of these gatherings, firelight glinting on serious faces. Promises of peace are renewed, hunting territories discussed, grievances aired. The rhythm of diplomacy weaves with the rhythm of trade, binding survival not only to food but to words. Yet laughter punctuates the seriousness. Someone haggles dramatically, pretending to faint at an offered price, sending a ripple of amusement through the circle. Children chase each other across the frozen river, sliding wildly, while dogs bark at the chaos. Even in diplomacy, humor becomes its own kind of currency. As night falls, songs rise, drums thrum, voices weave, and the stars above mirror the sparks flying from bonfires. Strangers share bowls of stew, then become friends, allies, kin by the next morning. You feel the warmth ripple through you, proof that even in frozen landscapes, human connection finds ways to flourish. When you finally trudge homeward, sled heavier with goods and spirit lighter with fellowship, you realize winter isn't only about enduring, it's about reaching across snow, finding others in the silence, and proving that even in the coldest season, bonds of trade and trust can keep the fire alive. The sled creaks beneath its new load, furs lashed tight, shells clinking in little bundles, the sound oddly cheerful against the frozen silence. As you trudge home from the trading camp, another sound catches your ear, the shuffle of feet, the rasp of wool on snow. Strangers arrive at the edge of camp, wrapped not in buffalo robes, but in blankets of woven cloth. Their hats are broad, their coats heavy, their breath puffing white like yours. These are Europeans, and with them comes something both strange and familiar, warmth in a new form. Encounters with European winter gear were curious at first. Wool blankets, iron pots, felt hats, and woven mittens seemed both unnecessary and remarkable to people who had thrived for generations without them. You run your hand across a wool blanket, thick, scratchy, smelling faintly of lanolin. It is warm, yes, but not the same kind of warm as buffalo hide, which seems to radiate life itself. A mainstream historical fact, by the 17th and 18th centuries, wool blankets and coats became some of the most traded items between Europeans and native peoples, often exchanged for furs. These goods gradually wove themselves into winter survival strategies, blending with older traditions rather than replacing them outright. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some native people jokingly called wool blankets hairless hides. They found it amusing that Europeans would prize something without fur, comparing it to an animal stripped bare. Imagine the laughter around the fire as someone dramatically draped a blanket over themselves, declaring, "See, I've tamed the naked beast." Historians still debate the effects of these exchanges. Did European gear truly improve winter survival, or did reliance on trade make communities more vulnerable when supplies faltered? Archaeological evidence shows both buffalo hides and wool blankets layered together, suggesting adaptation rather than replacement, but opinions differ. You imagine the sensory blend, the smell of wool mingling with the musk of animal hides, the gleam of metal pots simmering beside clay ones, the sight of snowshoes next to imported boots. A child might wear rabbit fur mittens while wrapped in a wool scarf, embodying two worlds stitched together by necessity. Conversations flicker in firelight. Some admire the new materials, marveling at their warmth and durability. Others shake their heads, muttering that nothing beats the old ways, that buffalo and elk kept their ancestors alive long before ships crossed the sea. Both voices carry weight, both rooted in the same truth. Survival demands what works. And beyond clothing, trade brought change to winter itself. Guns altered hunting, kettles changed cooking, beads transformed decoration. Yet in these frozen nights, the most immediate symbol was the blanket draped across shoulders, the mittens pulled tight, the coat stitched thick. You picture a winter gathering where half the circle sits in fur robes, the other half in wool coats, all of them laughing, eating, and planning together. The mingling of fabrics mirrors the mingling of cultures, awkward, sometimes tense, sometimes warm, always complicated. At night, you curl beneath layers, one buffalo robe, one wool blanket. The weight presses heavy, the warmth seeps in, and you feel yourself drifting. Two traditions overlap, not yet in harmony, not yet in conflict, but simply sharing space in the endless cold. And you realize, encounters with European winter gear were not about choosing one world over another. They were about weaving pieces of both into the same story of survival, because winter cared little for origins. All it demanded was warmth. The night is quiet, the storm past, the predators gone. Only the crackle of the fire fills the lodge, and over it, a sound more subtle rises, humming. It begins low, just a single voice. Then another joins, and soon the room swells with song. In winter, music wasn't just entertainment, it was a lifeline, something to steady the heart when the world outside seemed determined to freeze it solid. Songs to endure the cold came in many forms. Some were work chants, steady rhythms that kept hands moving as hides were scraped or firewood split. Others were lullabies, soft melodies meant to coax restless children into sleep. And then there were the songs sung purely for spirit, carrying hope into the long dark nights. You close your eyes, feeling the vibrations hum in your chest, as though the song itself were another layer of warmth. A mainstream historical fact, drumming and singing were central to winter ceremonies and daily life across native communities. The steady beat of a drum was said to mirror the heartbeat of the earth, reminding everyone that even in the stillness of snow, life pulsed on beneath. Groups like the Anishinaabe and Lakota wove drumming into winter rituals, both to honor spirits and to strengthen community bonds. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some winter songs weren't sung to people at all, but to animals. Hunters would softly sing to their dogs before a journey, promising them safety, or to a freshly killed deer, thanking it for its gift. Imagine leaning over a steaming pot of stew, quietly humming to the venison within, while your family teases, "Careful, you'll sing it back to life." Historians still debate whether winter songs were meant primarily for ceremony or for survival morale. Were they prayers, or were they psychological tools to ease hardship? Perhaps both, layered together like the hides and blankets pulled across sleeping bodies. What is certain is that songs were never wasted breath. They were as essential as firewood. The sensory details weave themselves into memory. The thud of a hand drum echoing in your ribs, the high voices rising like sparks into smoke holes, the steady sway of bodies moving in rhythm even in cramped lodges. You hear laughter break into the middle of a song when a child joins too loudly or a dog howls in harmony. Humor stitched itself into music, making it sweeter. Even alone, songs mattered. A hunter trudging across snow might hum under his breath to keep fear at bay. A woman stirring stew might sing softly to steady her hands when food was scarce. You picture yourself walking into the storm, wind shrieking, but inside your chest a melody repeats, stubborn and comforting. You are not alone. By the fire tonight, voices blend. A grandmother leads with a song so old that no one remembers when it began. Children fumble with the words but catch the tune, their giggles sliding into harmony. The fire glows brighter somehow, as if fed by sound as much as wood. And when at last the singing fades into silence, the lodge feels different, softer, stronger. You curl beneath your robe, the echoes still lingering in your ears, and realize that songs were not just to pass the time. They were the proof that spirits could not be frozen. As long as voices lifted into the night, warmth endured. The fire flickers low, shadows leaping high against the curved lodge walls. You lie on your side, half drowsing, when an elder's voice breaks the quiet. It is not a work song this time, nor a council speech. It is a story, but not the kind meant to lull children. This tale is older, stranger, and a little unsettling. Tonight, the lodge will echo with legends of ice beings. Every community carried such stories, whispered when the world outside seemed too still. You sit up, listening as the elder's voice dips low, drawing you into a world where snow itself had a face, where shadows in drifts moved with intent, where the cold carried footsteps that never quite vanished. A mainstream historical fact. Algonquian peoples told stories of the Wendigo, a gaunt, ravenous creature born of greed and hunger. Said to stalk forests in winter, the Wendigo embodied what happened when desperation consumed humanity. The legend warned against selfishness, teaching that to hoard food while others starved was to risk becoming something monstrous. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some tales described trickster spirits who played pranks in snowstorms, tying knots in snowshoes or swapping sleds during the night. Imagine waking to find your carefully laid sleds crisscrossed, dogs howling at the confusion, and everyone laughing nervously, muttering that the ice beings had been up to mischief again. Scholars still puzzle over these legends. Were they literal beliefs, scaring children into obedience, or symbolic tales teaching ethics? Some argue that beings like the Wendigo were psychological mirrors of famine and isolation, while others insist communities feared them as real threats lurking in frozen woods. The debate circles endlessly, like tracks in fresh snow. You feel the sensory weight of the stories as they unfold. The elder leans closer to the fire, his face carved in shadow, eyes gleaming with reflected flame. Outside, the wind moans, perfectly timed, making children squeal and adults exchange wary smiles. The smell of smoke thickens as the tale darkens, and you draw your robe tighter without realizing it. The stories paint vivid images. Giants made of ice striding across plains, their voices booming like thunder, frost tricksters laughing in gusts of wind, skeletal shadows peering into lodges, searching for cracks in the walls. You picture them vividly, so much so that every creak of timber sounds suspicious. Every draft of cold air feels like a hand brushing your skin. Yet, even in fear, laughter finds a place. Someone mimics a monster's howl too dramatically, and the lodge erupts with giggles. Children peek out from under hides, half terrified, half thrilled, begging for more. The line between horror and humor blurs, because even frightening legends carry warmth when shared together. And beneath the entertainment lies the lesson. Survive the winter not only with food and fire, but with kindness, humility, and generosity. To mock the spirits too much, or to give in to selfishness, was to invite the ice beings closer. The tales pressed morality into memory as firmly as snow pressed prints into the earth. When the story ends, the fire pops, showering sparks. Everyone exhales as if waking from a trance. You stretch, still glancing at the shadows near the door just in case. And as you drift into sleep, the elder's voice lingers, wrapping around your dreams like a second blanket. Because in frozen nights, fear and wonder walk together, and legends of ice beings remind you that winter is not empty. It is full of watchful eyes, both real and imagined. The blizzard has passed, the howls of predators have faded, and the night sky opens wide. You step outside, robe pulled close, and nearly lose your breath, not from the cold this time, but from the clarity above. The stars look close enough to touch, each one sharp as a blade, their light scattering across the snow like diamonds spilled on a black cloth. It's in these nights, when the air is thin and still, that the sky becomes both compass and scripture. Star maps in clear skies were more than decoration. They guided hunters across plains, told travelers when to move, and framed stories of origin. You tilt your head back, eyes watering from the brightness, and you feel the vastness pressing down, immense yet strangely comforting. The stars, eternal and unblinking, were companions as reliable as fire and food. A mainstream historical fact, the Lakota, among others, organized constellations into a star map mirroring their earthly camps and sacred sites. The stars were not distant ornaments, they were reflections of the land itself, reminding people that sky and earth were inseparable. To look up was to remember where you belonged below. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some stories claimed that certain bright stars were campfires of departed ancestors, burning in the heavens to warm the spirits. Imagine a child pointing upward, asking which fire belonged to their grandmother, and elders solemnly tracing constellations as if reading a map of memory. It turned cold nights into family reunions of a celestial kind. Historians still debate the exact accuracy of navigation by stars. Did hunters rely on them consistently for direction, or were they more symbolic markers of season and story? Evidence suggests both. Stars served practical needs, but they also carried spiritual weight, guiding not just feet, but hearts. The sensory experience is overwhelming. Your nose tingles from the cold, your breath fogs upward, and your eyelashes frost as you stare too long. The silence is total, broken only by the faint creak of trees under frost. Yet above, the sky hums with patterns, Orion's belt slanting like an arrow, the Pleiades clustered like beads on a necklace, the North Star steady as a watchful eye. People gathered to retell sky stories in these moments, Around the fire, elders gestured upward, tracing shapes: a great bison, a trickster coyote, a hero carrying fire. Children craned their necks, jaws open, eyes reflecting starlight. The stories anchored them to both cosmos and ground, teaching that survival meant knowing where you stood in both. Even in humor, the stars found a place. Someone might joke that a certain crooked constellation looked like a neighbor's bent snowshoe, or that a falling star was a clumsy hunter dropping his torch. Laughter echoed upward, as if the sky itself listened in. And when journeys were needed, stars steadied the way. Imagine trudging across a moonlit plain, sled dragging behind, snow crunching with each step. You lift your head, spot the North Star, and your heart steadies. You know where home lies, even if your footprints vanish behind you. Back inside, you curl beneath robes, the stars still etched on your eyelids. The fire hums low, but above you, beyond wood and hide, the night sky blazes. And you realize, in frozen silence, the stars were more than lights. They were memory, guidance, promise maps etched not on paper but on the eternal canvas overhead. The air feels different tonight. You step outside and catch a faint drip, drip, drip from the lodge roof, each droplet glinting in moonlight before vanishing into the crusted snow. The ground smells faintly of wet earth beneath the frost, and for the first time in months, a soft breeze carries something gentler than knives of ice. Spring teases its return. But you've lived through winters before, you know better than to trust too quickly. The snow is still deep, and storms have a way of lashing out just when you let your guard down. Still, hope stirs in your chest, as stubborn as a shoot pressing through frozen soil. A mainstream historical fact. Many native communities named this transitional period with moons tied to Thor or Renewal. The Dakota spoke of the moon when the ducks come back, while the Ojibwe called it the sucker moon for the fish returning to streams. These names were calendars of hope, markers that the season of hunger was about to end. And here's a quirky tidbit. Children were sometimes sent out to check puddles each morning, competing to see who could find the first true sign of melt. Whoever spotted running water first would boast for weeks, strutting around camp as if they had summoned spring themselves. Imagine the laughter as one child triumphantly holds up a dripping stick, while others groan in defeat. Historians still debate how communities managed this in-between season. Was it a time of relief or of greatest danger? Evidence suggests both. While Thor promised new life, it also brought flooding rivers, thin ice, and unpredictable storms. Survival meant balancing optimism with caution, celebrating carefully while keeping firewood piled high. You feel it in your senses, the crunch of snow softer underfoot, the faint gurgle of water beneath ice, the smell of damp earth mixing with wood smoke. Birds reappear, their calls thin but unmistakable, and you pause, heart quickening at the sound of wings. The silence of winter begins to crack, replaced by murmurs of change. Inside the lodges, talk shifts. Elders nod at the dripping eaves, murmuring predictions. Hunters prepare traps for beaver and muskrat returning to streams. Women ready seeds, testing their fingers against kernels that will soon find soil. Children run more freely, faces flushed not from frost but from excitement. Yet the cold still lurks. Some mornings arrive with biting winds, snow swirling as if mocking your hope. You pull your robe tighter, muttering under your breath, and the camp chuckles, knowingly spring always tests patience. By firelight, though, optimism wins. Stories of green shoots and first harvests are told again, laughter bubbling as people imagine swimming in rivers or lying in grass. Someone teases, "Soon we'll forget what it felt like to shiver," though everyone knows the memory of this winter will never fade completely. As you curl back beneath your robe, listening to the drip of melting snow outside, you realize the beauty of this moment. It is fragile, uncertain, but it holds the greatest gift of all, the promise that winter, no matter how endless it feels, will always give way to life again. The air grows softer by the day now, Each morning you step outside and see more patches of earth showing through, dark against the shrinking snow. The river groans under its thinning skin of ice, and geese fly overhead, their cries echoing like horns announcing victory. Winter has not been defeated, it has simply stepped aside. And with that retreat comes the time for rites of thaw and gratitude. Communities did not let the season turn without marking it. Survival through the frozen months was never taken for granted. People gathered to thank spirits, animals, ancestors, and the land itself. You join the circle, feet wet in melting slush, as elders prepare offerings. Smoke rises once again, not of desperation this time, but of celebration. A mainstream historical fact. The Iroquois midwinter ceremony often stretched into the thaw, blending renewal with thanksgiving. Dreams were shared, masks danced, and rituals cleansed the village of winter's weight. Other peoples too held spring feasts, offering the first catch of fish or the first shoots of green to the spirits before anyone else tasted them. Gratitude was the bridge into the new season. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some groups threw snowballs into the fire as a playful farewell to winter, laughing as the steam hissed upward. Imagine a child hurling the last slushy ball into the flames, triumphant, shouting, "Begone, winter!" while everyone chuckles at the dramatic gesture. Historians still discuss whether these rites were strictly seasonal or tied to larger cycles of hunting and planting. Were they about spring itself, or about reaffirming balance whenever life shifted? The records vary, but the common thread remains. Ceremonies of thanks marked survival, no matter the specific timing. You feel the sensory world of these gatherings vividly. The ground is damp, your boots sucking softly at the thawing earth. The air smells of mud and smoke, mixed with the sweet scent of sap rising in trees. Drums pulse again, slower this time, matched with songs of renewal. Voices rise, not in mourning or fear, but in joy full round, echoing off hills still patched with snow. Food plays its role too. Families share the last of dried stores in feasts meant to signal that scarcity is ending. Fresh catches of fish are cooked over open flames, their smell rich and oily after months of lean stews. Hands pass bowls, laughter bubbles, and children eat with greedy smiles, as though determined to make up for every hungry night. Even the animals seem to join. Birds flit close, dogs bark with unusual energy, and the returning sun bathes everything in light that feels golden after months of grey. You tilt your face upward, eyes closed, letting the warmth kiss your skin, and you feel the weight of winter slough away. At the end of the rites, the fire crackles high, offerings consumed, songs fading into night. You look around at faces glowing in firelight, each one etched with lines of endurance and relief. Gratitude hums in your chest, not just for warmth or food, but for the resilience that carried everyone through. As you curl into your robe that night, the earth damp beneath you instead of frozen, you know this truth. Winter will come again, but so will spring. The cycle endures. And gratitude is what makes the turning bearable. The snow has nearly vanished now, lingering only in shaded hollows and along the river's edge where the ice still clings stubbornly. The air smells of mud and wet bark, the first green shoots daring to push upward. You step outside, stretching stiff limbs, and the village hums with new energy. Children splash in puddles, dogs roll joyfully in thawing earth, and elders sit in sunlight, their faces tilted skyward as if drinking warmth. It is the season of remembering and of honoring those frozen nights that did not break you. Memory of frozen nights was never simple nostalgia. It was a collective act of storytelling, each family recalling the trials, the laughter, the visions, the hunger, the hunts. Around the fire, people spoke of the blizzard that buried lodges to their roofs, of the wolves that prowled too close, of the night songs that kept hearts alive. These memories were not only stories, they were lessons stored for the winters to come. A mainstream historical fact, oral traditions among tribes like the Ojibwe and Lakota often included recounting the winter just past. marking its events in pictographs on hides or birchbark scrolls. Each year became part of a larger history, a tapestry of seasons woven by memory itself. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some families gave playful names to the past winter, like the year of the frozen stew or the year of the runaway snowshoe, keeping humor alive even in recollection. Imagine an elder chuckling as he announces, "Ah, yes, the winter my beard froze solid to the lodge wall," while children giggle at the absurd image. Scholars still discuss how precise these memories were. Were they faithful chronicles? Or did the stories grow taller with each retelling? Likely both. Accuracy mattered for survival lessons, but exaggeration added color, laughter, and spirit. Memory was not a ledger, it was a living fire, reshaped by every tongue. You feel it now, the warmth of the fire on your cheeks, the soft ground beneath your feet instead of frozen earth, the smell of fresh sap sweetening the air. The sound of voices carries easily in the mild breeze. And for once, no one huddles tight for warmth. They sit open, shoulders relaxed, faces unguarded. Gratitude saturates every gesture. Children chase each other through puddles, shrieking, while adults lean back, smiling at the chaos. Food is shared freely now. Fish pulled fresh from the river, roots dug from thawing soil, even the last strips of dried meat brought out for celebration. No one counts rations tonight. Spring has reset the balance. And you, wrapped in your robe, feel the deep truth of it all. Frozen nights taught patience, tested bonds, sharpened ingenuity, and demanded respect for forces greater than yourself. Those nights left scars, but also stories. They carved humility into hearts, reminding everyone that survival was never a given, but a gift earned each day. As the sun dips and firelight takes over, you lie back, looking at stars no longer sharp with winter's edge but softened by spring haze. You breathe deeply, chest free of the constant ache of cold, and you smile. The frozen nights are behind you, but their memory will walk with you forever. Now the fire softens, and so do my words. You are no longer trudging through drifts or huddling beneath hides. You are lying still, listening, safe and warm wherever you are. The long journey through winter has ended, and all that remains is the gentle rhythm of breath and the echo of stories drifting like smoke. Let the memory of frozen nights fade into something lighter. Picture the snow melting, puddles forming, the air sweet with thaw. Imagine the weight of buffalo robes giving way to the comfort of sunlight across your skin. You are no longer carrying hunger, or cold, or fear. Those belong to the past, tucked into memory where they can no longer harm you. Feel your body sink deeper into the bed, as if the earth itself cradles you. Each breath is slower, heavier, calmer. The fire's crackle grows faint, replaced by the steady silence of a night that no longer needs guarding. Your thoughts drift, like sparks lifting into the dark, higher and higher, until they disappear among stars. Know that you have walked through storms, faced wolves in the shadows, endured the gnaw of hunger, and found laughter, song, and warmth along the way. The people of these stories endured, and so do you. Their resilience is yours now, folded into your chest like an ember that will never go out. Let sleep carry you gently. Let dreams arrive softly, bringing the promise of springtime fields and bright rivers. The frozen nights are behind you, and the warmth is ahead. Sweet dreams, my friend.